We're starting to ask the unaskable question here. I mean, the fact is that we at some point are going to have to unlock the economy. I've seen a lot of folks who are protesting that President Trump and people who are talking about the economy, you're overlooking human life. How could you overlook human life? If the suggestion is that we do everything we can in the United States to save even one human life, well, then we should all be walking around in bubbles. Forget about a pandemic. Like all the time, we should be walking around in bubbles. We should go back to horse and buggies.
One of the complaints that some of the right-wingers who hate watch our channel make is that we try to game the algorithm. More specifically, they accuse us of riding on the coattails of great men. That simply isn't true. But we do spend a lot of time talking about Ben Shapiro. Weirdly, Shapiro is popular. He has 1 million YouTube subscribers, has sold thousands of copies of his book, Facts Don't Care About Your Feelings, and hundreds of copies of his hilarious novel, True Allegiance. So yes, we do mention Ben Shapiro in order to get more views, but we also think that targeting Ben, critiquing him, is a good way to illustrate some basic misconceptions about the left and about society. Ben Shapiro makes an excellent foil for socialists because arguing with him about, say, what capitalism actually is can not only help us to destroy the right, but also help us formulate our own understanding. Hello, ZeroBooks readers and viewers. This video will start to answer the question, why not capitalism? By arguing against Ben Shapiro.
So let's say you own a pencil factory, I'm a worker in that pencil factory. You can have all the machinery, you can buy all the raw materials you want, but without me, and presumably many others like me, to assemble the pencils, all you would have is a pile of wood, yellow paint, graphite, rubber, and aluminum.
Okay.
That would be worth, and that is worth less than the pencil when you try and sell it. If you're just one person trying to assemble pencils, you're not going to get very far. You need workers. All the additional profit above made from selling the pencils or whatever good you produce above what is reinvested into the company ultimately goes to you or the investors, those who own shares in the means of production.
Right.
Under socialism, those people are the workers, and the example I give, again, is cooperative enterprise.
No, those are the people who are investing the risk. So if they carry the risk, then they get the benefit. The owner of the factory carries the risk, therefore he gets the benefit. The workers in the company you mentioned, if that company were to go bankrupt, they would carry the risk as well as the benefit. If the company goes bankrupt and this guy has to pay off all of his debts, the worker may lose his job, but he's not the one who's going to incur the debt of having gone bankrupt. If you incur risk, then you're the one who pays the downside. The worker does not pay the downside. Okay, it is the investor who pays the downside, who invested in all the machinery, who sunk millions of dollars into making your labor productive. Because guess what? Your labor is without that machinery. Gunk. Nothing. You don't have a pencil to put together. You don't got the wood. You don't got the paint. You don't got the rubber. You don't got the metal. You got nothing. Right? You're sitting there, standing outside, twiddling your thumbs. It required somebody to invest. Who do you think put more in? The guy who spent millions of dollars buying all the machinery, leasing the place, making sure there was a management structure, doing the LLC formation, making sure all the tax code was in compliance, or you standing outside because you can stick a piece of graphite into a piece of wood. Now we're done.
In this clip, both the nominal socialist and Shapiro take it for granted that our society, governed as it is by the exchange of goods valued by units of labor time, is transhistorical, unquestionable, just a natural fact. The question of who needs whom, capitalist or worker, is the wrong one. Clearly, the workers need capital, and capital requires workers. Whether an individual private capitalist or a worker-owned collective controls the capital isn't significant. What matters is the generation of a surplus and the expansion of capitalist production. It's perhaps worth noting that in a time of general crisis, it is the workers and not the capitalists who take the most risks and who suffer the most. For instance, if Amazon were to lose its value and Jeff Bezos were to lose his billions, he would not be personally responsible for paying off the debts of the company. Rather, the corporation itself would go into bankruptcy, the assets of the company would be sold off at whatever price could be had, and the debtors would be paid whatever could be paid. But even if Bezos were made homeless, he would only be joining the ranks of millions of those who the crisis had already put on the streets. Further, even in the best of times, when the giant corporations are relatively secure, The average entrepreneur running a sole proprietorship usually only risks being returned to the labor pool, as in order to encourage productive investment, the state protects entrepreneurs from homelessness and destitution through bankruptcy laws. But to go further down this road is to risk granting the ideological assumptions of the capitalist apologist. The question for workers is not who takes the most risk, but rather, what are the limits built into this mode of life?
Well, capitalism is a system of capital accumulation, and that's why it has the name it does. And capital accumulation is rooted ultimately in the exploitation of labor, of working class. This is really the root basis of capitalism. There's a lot more that you can say about capitalism. Came into being in the late 16th and early 17th century as a kind of mercantilist system evolving out of feudalism. In the late 18th century, 19th century, you have the first industrial revolution, or the major industrial revolution with Britain, and then capitalism becomes industrial capitalism, more like what we have today. But it's fundamentally oriented around the accumulation of capital, and the nature of that is that it's a non-stop system. Capital itself is self-expanding value. If the system reproduces at the same level as before, it goes into a crisis. Every year it has to get bigger. There has to be accumulation of capital. It involves inevitably the concentration and centralization of wealth, and there's a tendency for greater inequality in income and wealth in society, but it's all rooted in this process of capital accumulation. There's never been a society like capitalism previously in history because it is propelled by this unending quest for accumulation and growth.
The most obvious limit we live with under capitalism is this. In order for anything like stability to be obtained, we have to continue to expand our productive capacity. We have to grow, grow, grow. This is obviously a problem right now because the current pandemic has led to a necessary slowdown in production, and this in turn has created a panic as investors realize that the economy is about to do the opposite. We're about to shrink. We have the capacity to provide enough food for everyone, enough power, even enough toilet paper. But because the virus will slow down the production of capitalist values as measured in the time spent working, because capital threatens to shrink, the system is in disarray. Defenders of capitalism often cast themselves as the champions of Western values, or of something called Western civilization. Now, as Michael Brooks puts it in his book, Against the Web, Ben Shapiro claims that Western civilization owes its greatness to two sources: Judeo-Christian religiosity on the one hand, and Greek reason on the other. Putting aside the fact that this conception of Western civilization is ahistorical, what's most significant about Shapiro's formulation of Greece and Jerusalem is how it can be seen as a purely pragmatic ideological formulation. The Greek side of this formula is a stand-in for Shapiro's neoliberal commitments. When it comes to economic policies, young Shapiro is an old-fashioned Reaganite. Jerusalem, on the other hand, stands in for his commitment to its social conservatism. And for a time, these two ideological stances could at least seem to cohere as they defined the American right. But this supposedly Greek commitment to the logic of the market has had unintended consequences since Reagan. Inequality, mass incarceration, the slow decline of U.S. life expectancy, rising unemployment, All of these things spring out of the economic commitments of the Reaganite right. However, they could all be explained away by pointing to the cultural failures of an American populace that was too socially liberal. Unemployment wasn't high for structural reasons, but because of a lack of commitment to the best moral principles as found in the Judeo-Christian tradition.
This is the straight society, the orderly, well-managed, well-disciplined world of the establishment. It is made possible by the Protestant ethic. Work is noble, worldly achievement the sign of God's favor. But not everyone embraces these hallmarks of success. In each city across the land there exists another culture whose very philosophy and way of life rejects the fierce competition and its material rewards, and in so doing refutes the order and discipline of the establishment.
But if our current economic and health crisis demonstrates anything, it's this. Our economic system makes concrete demands on us, and our cultural responses to these demands are mostly rationalizations after the fact. We're not able to simply act to meet our physical needs directly, but must act through a system based on the endless expansion of labor time and economic value. The choices we make are always at least attempts to manage to live while meeting the needs of the capitalist system. So, for instance, in January, we did not prepare adequately for the coronavirus because to do so would frighten investors and cause an economic crisis. Eventually, however, not acting to contain the threat of the virus was seen as a greater risk to investment and to the expansion of capital than a partial work stoppage and limited state-directed production would be. And today, we're not sure what to do. We're at a crossroads, with some politicians arguing for the masses to return to work, while others suggest that we'll need to shelter in place for many months and use Keynesian spending to keep the system going. The reality is that nobody can quite predict what the consequences of either approach will be for the project of expanding capitalist value. We've reached an impasse and will likely only come up with some sort of ideological explanation for what we do next, once the decision has been made for us.
It's the one thing we feared. Kathy.
Yes, it is.
Thanks for watching this ZeroBooks video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to this channel and click on the notifications bell so that you'll be alerted whenever we release a new video. You should also consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons get access to our Inside ZeroBooks podcast every week and can get access to the ZeroBooks book club and help us to continue making online content from the left.